Where did you get that bracelet?" She said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. 50 pairs of eyes snapped toward her. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. A 24-year-old waitress with flour on her apron and grief in her eyes had just walked straight up to the most feared table in the room, and every single person in that diner thought she had lost her mind. If this story already has your heart beating faster, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, and stay with me all the way to the end. Because what happened next in that little diner in Red Creek, Arizona changed every single life in that town forever. The heat in Red Creek, Arizona in the middle of July was not the kind of heat that made you uncomfortable. It was the kind of heat that made you angry. The kind that crawled under your skin and reminded you every single second of every single day that you were small and the desert was large and the sun did not care about your problems one bit. Emily Carter understood that feeling better than most. She had been running the Red Creek Family Diner for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. She knew the exact count because every single one of those days had been a fight. A fight to keep the lights on. A fight to keep the suppliers paid. A fight to keep smiling at customers when the numbers in her ledger looked like a slow-moving disaster. Her father, Michael Carter, had built this diner with his own 2 hands 22 years ago, back when he came home from the Army with a bad knee, a few medals he never talked about, and a dream of feeding people. He had poured everything into it, his savings, his sweat, his whole heart. And then 5 years ago, he had disappeared, not walked away, not left a note, not chosen something else, disappeared. One night, there had been terrible flooding in the canyon roads east of town. Michael Carter had driven out there because that was who he was, a man who showed up. 3 families had been trapped by rising water, and he had heard it on the scanner in the diner kitchen and grabbed his old Army kit and gotten in his truck without a second thought. Search and rescue teams had found the families, cared wet and alive, but they had never found Michael Carter. They had found his truck half buried in silt downstream. They had found his Army jacket snagged on a fence post, but they had never found him. The county declared him deceased after 2 years. Emily's mother, Carol Carter, had quietly moved to Tucson to live with her sister 6 months after that because staying in Red Creek meant driving past the diner every day, and she could not do it anymore. She had begged Emily to come with her. Emily had said no, not because she was stubborn, though she was, but because walking away from the diner felt like admitting that her father was truly gone. And something deep inside Emily Carter, something she could not explain, and had stopped trying to refuse to believe that. So she stayed. She hired back the 2 cooks her father had let go before he disappeared. She kept the Tuesday special chicken fried steak with white gravy and 2 sides because her father had never once changed that Tuesday special in 22 years, and she was not about to be the one who did. She smiled at the regulars. She topped off coffee without being asked. She fixed the broken front step that the landlord kept promising to fix and never did. And at night, when the diner was empty and clean and quiet, she sat at the corner booth with a cup of tea and looked at the framed photograph of her father on the wall behind the register, and she talked to him. She told him about the broken refrigerator compressor that had cost her $800 she did not have. She told him about the new family that had moved in down the road and how the little girl always ordered the grilled cheese and always left a drawing on the napkin. She told him she was scared. She told him she was tired. She told him she missed him every single day. She also told him she was not leaving. That Tuesday in July started like every other Tuesday. Hank Briggs, a retired rancher, with hands like 2 baseball gloves, was in his usual seat at the counter by 6 in the morning, working through his scrambled eggs and not talking much because Hank never talked much before 8. The Delgado brothers came in around 7 for their coffee and their ongoing argument about the best route to drive between Red Creek and Phoenix, which they had been arguing about for 11 years without resolution. Donna Whitfield, who taught 3rd grade at the elementary school during the year and spent summers worrying about her tomato plants, was in the corner booth with a crossword puzzle and a glass of sweet tea. It was ordinary. It was familiar. It was exactly the kind of morning Emily needed, because the night before she had spent 3 hours on the phone with her father's old accountant, trying to figure out whether she could make payroll at the end of the month, and the answer had been a long silence, followed by the words, "It's going to be very close, honey." By 11 o'clock, the lunch crowd was starting to filter in. By noon, the diner was full. By 12:30, Emily had refilled the coffee station twice and was already thinking about the dinner prep she needed to start by 2. And then the sound came. She heard it before she saw anything. Everyone in the diner heard it. It started low, almost like distant thunder, But it didn't roll or fade the way thunder did. It built. It kept building. It became something physical, a vibration she could feel in the soles of her shoes through the linoleum floor, a rumble that shook the glasses hanging above the counter just slightly, just enough. Donna Whitfield looked up from her crossword. Hank Briggs turned slowly on his stool. Everybody in the diner stopped moving at the same time. Then the motorcycles came into view through the big front window, and nobody said a word. They came in a formation that was tight and deliberate and absolutely unmistakable. The colors, the patches, the particular way they carried themselves, even on bikes, with a kind of territorial certainty that said they were not passing through so much as arriving. And they kept coming. 1, 5, 10, 20. Emily stood at the counter counting and stopped counting when she got to 50 because the parking lot was full and they were still coming around the corner. Hell's Angels. Donna Whitfield quietly closed her crossword puzzle. One of the Delgado brothers put a 20 on the table, which was more than enough to cover both their coffees and a generous tip. And he and his brother stood up slowly and walked to the door in a way that was not quite running, but was also not quite walking. A couple in the far booth who Emily had never seen before tourists, she had guessed from their rental car key fob, left 2 plates of food virtually untouched and followed the Delgados out. Hank Briggs did not move. But Hank Briggs had served 2 tours in Korea and had once broken up a bar fight involving 4 men considerably larger than himself using nothing but his voice. So his stillness was a different kind of stillness than everyone else's. Emily stood behind the counter. The first riders came through the door in groups of 3 and 4, scanning the room with the practiced ease of people who had learned long ago to know exactly what kind of room they were walking into. Several of them were well past 60. Some were younger. One of them, a large man with close-cropped gray hair and a beard that had gone from pepper to salt sometime in the last decade, moved to the biggest table in the room, the round 6-top near the window, with a kind of authority that required no announcement. Others pulled chairs from nearby tables. Others took the booths. The room rearranged itself around them without a word being spoken. Emily stood still. Her notepad was in her hand. Her pen was behind her ear. And she was staring at the large man with the gray hair. Not at his face. At his wrist. At the bracelet on his left wrist. It was not an unusual-looking piece of jewelry exactly. It was a military-style identification bracelet, the kind that came back in style in the 90s, made of stainless steel with a small plate on top. The kind of thing a veteran might wear as a quiet acknowledgement of service. The kind of thing nobody would look twice at in a town full of people who had served. Except Emily Carter knew that bracelet. She knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. She knew the particular scratch on the right side of the plate because she had watched her father get that scratch one Christmas when he was moving boxes in the garage and knocked his wrist against the shelf corner and made a sound that he immediately tried to pretend was not pain, so his daughters wouldn't worry. She knew the slight discoloration on the clasp from years of being taken off and put back on during surgery rotations in the Army when regulations required it. She knew it because she had given it to her father herself on his 40th birthday, a gift from her and her younger sister with his initials engraved on the back. MJC, Michael James Carter. Emily Carter set down the coffee pot in her hand very carefully on the counter. She straightened her apron. She took a breath that was so controlled it was almost a kind of prayer. And then she walked across the diner toward the table of 50 Hell's Angels riders. She was aware of the room. She was aware that Hank Briggs had gone very still on his stool. She was aware that the remaining customers were watching her with the kind of paralyzed attention people give to a person who is doing something terrifying and inexplicable, and that they cannot look away from. She was aware that the riders nearest to her were clocking her movement with expressions that shifted from dismissal to curiosity to something more watchful. She stopped at the table. The large man with the gray hair looked up. "Where did you get that bracelet?" The table went completely silent. The large man's eyes did not change expression for a long moment. He looked at her the way a man looks at something unexpected that he is deciding whether or not to take seriously. His eyes moved from her face down to his wrist and then back up to her face. "Excuse me." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "The bracelet on your wrist," Emily said. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. "I want to know where you got it." The man on the large gray-haired man's left, a wiry guy with a long braid and a sun-worn face, let out a short sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "Little girl, you want to go back to the coffee station." "I'm not talking to you," Emily said, and she did not even look at him when she said it. Her eyes stayed on the gray-haired man. "I'm asking you." The table was very, very quiet. The gray-haired man tilted his head slightly. His eyes had changed. There was something in them now that had not been there 30 seconds ago. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. "It's mine," he said. "No," Emily said. "It isn't." She reached into the pocket of her apron. She had carried it every day for 5 years, the way some people carry a photograph or a rosary. A small, folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and placed it flat on the table between them, and it was a photocopy of the original receipt from the engraving shop in Tucson, the one she had paid for herself with 3 weeks of babysitting money when she was 19 years old. And the order form listed the bracelet specifications, the style number, the metal type, and the engraving, MJC. She watched the man read it. She watched his face. "My name is Emily Carter," she said quietly. "My father is Michael James Carter. He was an Army medic. He disappeared 5 years ago during a flood in the canyon roads outside this town. That bracelet was a birthday gift from me and my sister, and it has been on his wrist in every single photograph of him since his 40th birthday." She paused. "So I am going to ask you one more time. Where did you get that bracelet?" The man named Jack Donovan, though she did not know his name yet, looked at the receipt for a long time. Then he looked up at her. Something had shifted behind his eyes. The calculation was gone. What replaced it was something that looked almost like pain. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I'd rather stand." "Emily." He used her name. Her name in his mouth sounded like he had been carrying it somewhere and had finally found the place to put it down. "Please sit down." She sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the table had gone still in a way that was different from the earlier silence. The wiry man with the braid had dropped whatever posture he had been performing. The riders nearest the table had leaned in slightly involuntarily. Hank Briggs at the counter had turned all the way around on his stool. "What's your road name?" Emily said, because she had learned some things in 5 years of looking. "Reaper," the man said. "And you're a road captain." It was not really a question, but he nodded. "How long have you had the bracelet?" Emily said. Jack Donovan looked at his wrist. His hand turned over slowly, and he looked at the back of the plate the way he had clearly looked at it many times before. 4 years and 8 months, he said. Emily's breath caught, because that meant whoever had given it to him 4 months after her father disappeared, which meant whoever gave it to him had known her father after he disappeared. "Who gave it to you?" she said. Jack Donovan looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something that cracked the foundation of everything Emily Carter thought she knew about the last 5 years of her life. "Your father did." The diner went so quiet Emily could hear the ceiling fan. "He gave it to me himself," Jack said, "on a highway outside Flagstaff, about 4 months after the flood." Emily's hands were flat on the table and she could feel them trembling, and she could not make them stop. "That's not possible," she said, and her voice was still steady, but only barely the way a cracked thing is still standing, but you can see the fracture running through it. "They found his truck. They found his jacket. He was declared—" "I know what he was declared," Jack said, "and I know how it looked, and I know what the county said." He leaned forward. "And I'm telling you what I know to be true. Michael Carter was alive 4 years and 8 months ago. He gave me this bracelet himself, and he told me—" He stopped. "What?" Emily said. "What did he tell you?" Jack Donovan looked around the table. Something moved between the riders, a current of recognition, a decision being made collectively in the space of 2 seconds. He looked back at her. "He told me to take care of it. He said if anything happened to him, if he couldn't come back, he wanted someone to make sure it got to his daughter." He paused. "He said you were the one who would keep looking." Emily Carter sat at that table with 50 Hells Angels riders in the diner her father built, and she pressed her hands flat against the table to keep them still. And she looked at the bracelet on Jack Donovan's wrist, and she did not cry. She wanted to. The feeling was enormous, a flooding kind of feeling, the kind that comes when something you have been holding back for 5 years suddenly finds the crack it has been looking for. But she did not let it out, not yet. Because if her father was alive, if he had been alive, then the question was not where he was. The question was why. Why had he not come home? Why didn't he come back? She said. And Jack Donovan's expression shifted again, and this time what she saw there was not pain. It was something harder, something careful, because he said he was afraid of what would happen to you and your mother if he did. The wiry man with the braid made a small sound. One of the older riders at the edge of the table put his hand briefly on the table and then took it away. Small movements, small acknowledgments of something they all knew and had been carrying. Afraid of what? Emily said. Of the people who wanted him gone. Emily looked at him. What people? Jack said a name. And three things happened simultaneously in the Red Creek family diner. The last remaining tourist near the window stood up very quickly and went for the door. Hank Briggs at the counter turned back around and stared at his coffee cup and was very still. And Emily Carter felt the world she had been living in for 5 years rearrange itself into an entirely different shape, one that was darker and more complicated and somehow against all logic, slightly more hopeful. Because a man who disappeared to protect his family or from something is not a dead man. He is a man with a reason. He is a man with a story, and a story Emily Carter knew was something you could follow. Tell me everything, she said. And Jack Donovan looked at her for a long moment, at the flower still on her apron, at the set of her jaw, at the particular kind of stillness she carried that was not fear, but something much older and more durable than fear. And he seemed to make a decision. He pulled his coffee cup toward him, looked at it, set it down. It's going to take a while, he said. I've got time, Emily said. I've been waiting 5 years. And at the counter, one of the diner's two cooks leaned out of the pass-through window, looked at the scene in the dining room, the young woman sitting at the table of bikers, the stillness of the room, the weight of something that had just been set into motion, and then looked at the other cook and said very quietly, "We're probably going to need more coffee." He was not wrong. Jack Donovan began to talk. And as he talked, the diner stayed full because nobody left, not the remaining customers, not Hank Briggs, not even Donna Whitfield, who had put her crossword completely away by now and was sitting very still with her hands folded on the table in front of her listening. Because even from across the room, even catching only fragments of what was being said, everyone in the Red Creek family diner could feel it. Something had been sleeping in that town for 5 years. And a 24-year-old waitress with flour on her apron had just walked up to the most feared table in the room and woken it up. Jack Donovan's voice was low and even and carried the particular weight of someone who has rehearsed something in his head many times and is finally, after a very long wait, being given the chance to say it out loud. He told her about the accident, not the flood that came later. He told her about 3 years before the flood on a stretch of highway outside Flagstaff on a Sunday night when a truck had forced two of his riders off the road in the dark, and it had gone very badly, very fast. He told her about lying in the road with 2 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder, and watching his friend Danny bleeding from somewhere that looked serious, and the sound of a truck stopping and boots on the asphalt, and then a voice saying calm and matter-of-fact and military precise, "I'm a medic, tell me what you need from me." "Your father stopped," Jack said. "He was on his way back from a supply run, had his kit in the truck. He didn't drive past. He didn't wait for the paramedics. He got out and he worked on Danny for 11 minutes with his hands and a kit that was 4 years out of date, and Danny is alive today because of those 11 minutes." Emily did not say anything. "We don't forget things like that," Jack said. "In our world, that means something permanent." Michael Carter stopped and helped 3 strangers who every person in that county would have told him to avoid, and he didn't ask for anything in return, and he didn't tell anyone about it, and he left his card and said if we ever needed anything from him, just call. He paused. "We didn't expect to need to call, but we kept the card." "And then the flood," Emily said. "And then the flood," Jack agreed. "But before the flood, about 2 months before your father called us." Emily looked up. "He was scared," Jack said. "Not for himself. That was the first thing he said when I picked up. I'm not calling for me. He had found something, working on his taxes of all things, he had found something wrong with the property records on a parcel of land adjacent to his. The diner sits on the edge of 3 different parcels, apparently, and one of them had been quietly reassigned in a records update, and when he pulled the thread, Jack shook his head slightly. He pulled a long thread. "What was on it?" Emily said. "Names," Jack said. "Dates. Transfer documents that had been altered. A pattern going back almost 15 years of properties changing hands at below market value, or being condemned on questionable grounds, or changing owners in ways that, if you knew what you were looking for, pointed to the same destination every time." "One person," Emily said. "One name," Jack confirmed. "Gerald Foss." The name landed in the room. Gerald Foss was not a man who looked like trouble. That was, Emily would later come to understand, the most dangerous thing about him. He was 61, silver-haired, irregular at the County Chamber of Commerce. Luncheons a donor to the local hospital's annual gala. The kind of man who shook hands with both of his hands and looked you in the eye the whole time, and whose name appeared on 3 buildings in Red Creek, and whose family had been in the county for 4 generations. He was widely described as a pillar of the community. He owned a development company. He had been buying land in the surrounding county for the better part of 20 years, patiently, methodically, without particular drama. He had the right permits. He had the right friends. He had the right conversations with the right people at the right times. He had also, if Michael Carter's research was correct, been systematically stealing land from families who didn't know enough to fight back. Your father was not an investigator, Jack said. He was not a lawyer. He was a cook with an Army medic background and a talent for math. But the math told a story that he could not ignore. He looked at Emily steadily. He made copies of everything, a lot of copies. He hid them in multiple places. And then he called me because he needed someone he trusted who was not from inside this county, someone who Foss's people couldn't reach, and he wanted us to know where the copies were in case something happened. In case something happened, Emily repeated. He thought he was being watched, Jack said. He didn't tell your mother. He didn't want her scared. He was trying to figure out the right way to bring it to someone who could actually do something with it. And then the flood happened, Emily said. Her voice had gone very flat and very quiet. And then the flood happened, Jack said. And he went out to help those families like he always did, because that's who he was. And whatever happened in those canyon roads, we don't know everything, but we know it wasn't random. Emily Carter sat very still. You think someone used the flood, she said. Not a question, a statement. The kind that lands like something dropping from a height. Jack looked at her for a long time. I think it, he said carefully, that your father called me 2 hours before he drove out to those canyons, and he told me that he had gotten a call from someone who said there were families trapped and he was going to help. And if he didn't call me back within 12 hours, I should assume the worst and protect what he had hidden. He paused. He did not call back. The ceiling fan turned. The coffee cooled in the cups. Emily Carter looked at the bracelet on Jack Donovan's wrist, and she thought about her father driving out to the canyon roads in the dark because someone had called and said there were families who needed help. And she thought about how perfectly that trap was constructed, built entirely from the knowledge of who Michael Carter was, of what he could not walk away from, of the particular way that good men are always most vulnerable to exactly that quality in themselves. Where are the documents, she said. That's what we've been trying to find out, Jack said. He told me where some of them were. We've collected some of them over the years, quietly, carefully, because going at this wrong would just bury it deeper. He looked at her with something that was direct and appraising and respectful all at once. But there are pieces we're missing, and the person who knew where those pieces were was my father, Emily said. Is your father? Jack said quietly. We have reason to believe he's still alive, Emily. Not certain, not confirmed, but reason to believe. The room tilted slightly. Emily Carter gripped the edge of the table. What reason, she said. Jack reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed a photograph on the table between them. It was blurry. It was taken from a distance, clearly without the subject's knowledge. It showed a man lean and gray at the temples, now standing outside a building in what looked like a small town, somewhere desert flat and unfamiliar. The man was looking away from the camera, but the angle of his jaw, the particular way he stood with his weight slightly on his left leg because the right knee never had quite healed. Emily pressed her fingers over her mouth. When was this taken? She whispered. 7 months ago, Jack said. We don't know where he is now. We don't know why he hasn't tried to contact you. But we think he believes that as long as the documents aren't public, coming home would put you in danger. He paused. We think he's waiting. We think he's been waiting for someone to finish what he started. Emily Carter looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked up. Then let's finish it, she said. And across the table, Jack Donovan, who had been writing for 40 years and had sat across from all manner of people in all manner of difficult rooms, looked at this 24-year-old woman with the flower on her apron and the grief behind her eyes and the jaw set like she was about to walk into something that would require everything she had, and he believed her. All right, he said, and the diner held its breath. And the story that had been buried for 5 years in Red Creek, Arizona began at last to come back to the surface. The coffee had gone cold. Nobody touched it. Jack Donovan had been talking for 40 minutes, and in that 40 minutes, Emily Carter had not moved from her chair, had not looked away from his face, and had not made a sound, except for twice once when he said her father's name in a context she had not expected, and once when he placed the photograph on the table. That second time, she had pressed her fingers over her mouth and held them there until she trusted herself again. Now the photograph was still on the table between them. Emily had not picked it up. She was afraid that if she picked it up, it would feel less real the way dreams sometimes dissolve the moment you tried to hold them. 7 months ago, she said again. Not asking, processing. A town called Mineral Wells, Jack said. Small, east of Wickenburg. Our guy out there, he wasn't looking for your father. He was passing through on unrelated business, and he saw a man who matched the description we'd been circulating internally for 3 years. He took the photo on his phone, sent it to me within the hour. Did he approach him? No. Jack shook his head. I told him not to, because if your father is living under a different name or in hiding, approaching him wrong could spook him into moving. And then we'd lose him again. He looked at her steadily. We needed more than a photo before we made a move. So you've been sitting on this for 7 months, Emily said, and there was an edge in her voice, now not quite anger, but something adjacent to it, something that had weight. We've been building toward it for 7 months, Jack said. There's a difference. The man with the long braid, his name was Cutter, she had gathered from the way the others addressed him, leaned forward with his elbows on the table. We're not law enforcement. We can't just walk into a situation like this without knowing the full shape of it. You go at something like Gerald Foss half-cocked, you don't get a second chance. I'm not half-cocked, Emily said. No, Cutter said, and he looked at her with something that was not quite surprise and not quite respect, but was somewhere between the two. You're not. An older rider at the far end of the table, a man Emily would later learn, had been with the chapter since before Jack had made a low sound in his throat. Jack, tell her the rest. Emily looked at Jack. There's more. Jack picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, put it down without drinking. 3 months ago, he said, one of the witnesses your father had originally found a man named Roy Pelham, a retired county surveyor, who had firsthand knowledge of how some of the property transfers were documented. Roy agreed to talk to us. Took us 2 years to get him to that point. He was scared. He'd been scared since your father disappeared because Roy knew what that disappearance most likely meant. What happened to Roy, Emily said. He talked to us on a Thursday, Jack said. The following Monday, he had a stroke. The word dropped into the conversation like something thrown from a height. Emily felt it land. He's alive, Jack said quickly. But he's in a care facility in Prescott, and he won't speak anymore. His daughter says it happened very fast. Says he'd been fine. Said the only unusual thing in the week before was that someone had come to his house asking questions, a man she didn't recognize, who said he was from the county assessor's office. And was he? Emily said. The county assessor's office has no record of sending anyone to Roy Pelham's house, Jack said. Ever. Emily Carter sat with that for a moment. She thought about Roy Pelham, whoever he was, a retired surveyor, who had spent 2 years being too afraid to talk, and then found the courage to talk, and then had a stroke 4 days later. She thought about her father, who had found something in a tax record and pulled a thread and then driven into canyon roads in the dark and vanished. She thought about the particular logic that connected those two things, the logic of a man like Gerald Foss, who had been doing this for 15 years, who had learned exactly how to reach into a situation and close it quietly before it opened too far. He's been watching, she said, this whole time. He has people watching for anything that could bring this back up. That's what we believe, Jacqueline said, which means Emily said slowly that 50 Hells Angels motorcycles just pulled into the parking lot of Michael Carter's diner. The table was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Cutter said, yeah, we know. Was that intentional? Jack looked at her. We needed a reason to be here that looked like nothing. Riders passing through a small town stopping for lunch. Not investigators, not witnesses, just a Tuesday. But you were coming here to find me, Emily said. We were coming here to find you, Jack confirmed. Emily Carter looked around the table. At the faces of men who ranged from somewhere around her age to somewhere around her father's age, who had spent 3 years quietly moving around the edges of something dangerous because they had not forgotten a man who stopped on a dark highway and spent 11 minutes keeping someone alive. She thought about what that meant about loyalty of that depth and duration, and she felt something shift inside her chest that was not entirely grief and not entirely gratitude, but was some combination of both that didn't have a clean name. Okay, she said, so what do you have? Jack reached into the inside pocket of his coat again, and this time what he produced was not a photograph. It was a folded piece of paper, worn at the creases from being opened and closed many times. He unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on the table and turned it so she could read it. It was a list, handwritten. The handwriting was her father's. Emily recognized it immediately, the particular way he made his sevens with a horizontal bar, threw them a habit from his army days, and the recognition hit her so suddenly and so physically that she had to press her feet flat on the floor to keep herself grounded. He gave us this the night he called, Jack said. Said it was a map, not a literal map, a list of locations where he had stored copies of the documents. Emily read the list. There were 7 items. 3 were addresses. 2 were what appeared to be storage unit numbers with partial codes. 1 was a name she didn't recognize. 1 was simply the word diner with a set of numbers after it. Her eyes stopped on the last item. She looked up. The diner, she said. We figure your father hid something here, Jack said. In the diner, before he disappeared. But we didn't have access, and we weren't about to break into a grieving family's place of business. He paused. We needed you. Emily looked at the list again. The numbers after the word diner were not a phone number. They were not a date. She stared at them, and then it hit her with such sudden clarity that she made a small sound. It's a combination, she said. A combination to what Cutter said. Emily stood up from the table so fast her chair scraped the floor. She was already moving toward the counter, already going around the back, and Jack was on his feet, and 2 other riders were standing before they even fully understood why. She went behind the register and through the pass-through door into the kitchen, and the cook, a stout, weathered man named Pete, who had worked for her father for 12 years, looked up from the grill with an expression that combined alarm and genuine confusion. Emily, what? The walk-in, she said. Move. Pete stepped aside without fully understanding why, and she pushed open the heavy walk-in refrigerator door, and Jack was right behind her, and the cold hit them both. And she was counting steps, going to the back left corner, going to the shelving unit her father had built himself out of steel pipe because the manufactured ones were never sturdy enough for him. She got down on one knee and looked at the base of the shelving unit, and there it was, a small panel, maybe 6 inches square, set into the wall behind the lowest shelf, almost completely hidden behind a box of industrial-sized tomato cans. How did you know? Jack said from behind her. Because, Emily said, pulling the tomato cans forward, my father built every shelf in this kitchen by himself. Every one of them is secured to the wall with 4 bolts. This one has always only had 3. I asked him about it when I was 17, and he said he ran out of the right size bolt. She looked at the panel. He never ran out of anything. Her hands were not quite steady. She pulled out her phone and looked at the list Jack had photographed and read the numbers and entered them into the small combination dial her father had set into the panel. And on the 3rd number, the panel clicked and swung open. Inside was a metal document box, the kind you could buy at any hardware store, fireproof, waterproof, sealed. It was cold to the touch. Emily pulled it out. It was heavier than she expected. She looked at Jack. He looked at her. We need somewhere private, she said. They brought the box to the corner booth that Emily always thought of as hers, the one where she drank her tea at night and talked to her father's photograph. Pete stood at the kitchen pass-through, keeping everyone else at a respectful distance without being asked to. Hank Briggs, who had not moved from his stool in 2 hours, was watching everything with his hands around his coffee mug and the expression of a man who has decided that whatever is happening is important enough to wait out. Emily opened the box. It was full of papers, organized, numbered, tabbed. Her father had been methodical. Of course he had been methodical. He was a medic. He had spent years in environments where disorganization cost lives. The papers were in plastic sleeves, dated and labeled in the same handwriting as the list. She picked up the first section and started reading. Jack sat across from her. He did not rush her. He watched her face as she read the way people watch a face for the thing the words are doing to the person behind the eyes. It took her 12 minutes to get through the first section. When she looked up, her expression had changed. He has everything, she said. Surveys, transfer documents, bank records. He has the names of 3 county officials who signed off on transactions they had no legal authority to sign off on. He has correspondence, actual letters between Foss's development company and a title company in Phoenix that processed transfers that should never have cleared. She stopped. He has the names of 47 families. 47, Jack said. 47 families who lost property. Some of them got lowball buyouts. Some of them got condemned on code violations that were either fabricated or massively overstated. Some of them just their titles got quietly reassigned in a records update, and by the time they noticed the legal window to contest had closed. She set the papers down. Her hands were steadier now than they had been. Anger, she had discovered long ago, was actually a very stabilizing emotion. This has been going on for 15 years. We knew the shape of it, Jack said. We didn't have the documentation. You do now, Emily said. Cutter had come to stand at the edge of the booth. He was looking at the papers with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way that meant it was covering something less neutral. This is enough to file with, he said. File with who? Emily said. He has county officials. He has people in this system who are already protecting this. State, Jack said. State AG's office. And there are journalists who've been sniffing at Foss's operation for 2 years without being able to get traction. Give them documentation like this, and they have traction. And between now and when that happens, Emily said, I'm sitting in a diner with a document box that can destroy one of the most powerful men in the county, and he has people watching for exactly this. The table was very quiet. Yes, Jack said, that's correct. So what's the plan? We don't move the documents today, Jack said. We photograph everything. Multiple people, multiple devices, all uploaded to off-site storage before we leave this parking lot. The physical box goes somewhere safe, not here. He looked at her. And you go about your day like nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, Emily said, and the flatness in her voice made Cutter look at her sideways. Except that I know my father is most likely alive, and I know he's been hiding for 5 years because he's afraid for us, and I have a box of documents that could bring down half the county establishment. She looked at Jack. Everything has changed. I know, Jack said quietly. I know it has. Emily picked up the photograph again, looked at it. The man standing outside the building in mineral realms, looking away from the camera, lean and gray, at the temples, her father. Alive probably 7 months ago, maybe alive now.